Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to Dominican University and the Leadership Lecture Series in partnership with Book Passage, Marin, and San Francisco's own independent bookstore. My name is Dr. Leanne Bartolini. I'm a professor here of psychology, and I'm a long-term board member of the Institute for Leadership Studies. This lecture series is a program of Dominican's Institute for Leadership Studies, also known as ILS, which is a center for leadership development. ILS provides education and training for students and professionals to become better leaders and offer public forums like this one to engage students, the campus, and the community in socially relevant discussions, to highlight inspiring acts of leadership across all the disciplines. Tonight's program welcomes Amy Tan in conversation with Susanne Pari, and I'm particularly thrilled to have just met Amy Tan, one of my favorite authors. Our lead sponsor for the 2017-2018 Leadership Lecture Series is Private Ocean, which is one of the oldest and largest privately held wealth management firms in Marin, and an innovator in personal financial planning. Private Ocean has been named 7 times by Worth Magazine as one of the top 100 registered investment advisors nationwide, is a 2-time recipient of the prestigious Schwab Impact Award, named the best wealth management firm by North Bay Biz, and a best place to work in the Bay Area by the San Francisco Business Times and the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Thank you, Private Ocean, for continuing to help bring our community together through these talks. An additional sponsor is Bank of Marin, which is supporting this evening's program as a gold sponsor, a leading community and business bank with 21 locations throughout the Bay Area. Bank of Marin invests in our community not only by delivering premier banking services, but also by investing dollars, expert leadership, and volunteer hours to hundreds of worthy organizations across the region. On behalf of the university, I would like to express gratitude to Private Ocean and Bank of Marin for their generous support of the Leadership Lecture Series in partnership with Book Passage. Joining us this evening to introduce tonight's speaker is Dr. Susan Duval-Dixon, Partner and Chief Operating Officer of Private Ocean Wealth Management. She is also a proud alumna of Dominican, and she teaches leadership in our MBA program.
Good evening, everyone. It is my honor to also have met Amy tonight, and that was a great opportunity for me. It is our joy and our luck that Amy Tan has returned to Angelico Concert Hall again to join our fan or Tan Club. Yes. Amy is a multiple New York Times bestselling author who was the co-producer and co-screenwriter for the film version of The Joy Luck Club 25 years ago. Born in the United States to immigrant parents, she lived in 12 homes by the time she graduated from high school and attended 5 colleges. Now she lectures at universities all over the world, from Stanford to Oxford to Beijing to Doha, Qatar. Amy also has spoken at the White House, presented TED Talks, and she has appeared on Sesame Street. Who knew? A former freelance business writer, Amy evolved into a highly successful, award-winning novelist. Her Joy Luck Club spent more than 40 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. She fulfilled her parents' longtime dream when she finally received an honorary doctorate from Dominican University. She was able to hand the diploma to her mother, who was sitting in the audience. Joining Amy on the stage, I'm sorry, I missed a little piece here. Amy's newest book, which I believe is what we're talking about tonight, is Where the Past Begins, a writer's memoir. She explores the dark side of the Joy Luck Club and her life as a writer, her childhood, and the symbiotic relationship between fiction and emotional memory. Joining Amy on stage in conversation is Susanne Pari. She is an Iranian-American writer and author of The Fortune Catcher, a novel of a young woman, American and Iranian, Jewish and Muslim, caught in the aftermath of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Amy and Susanne have been friends since 1991, when they were both in the Writers Guild, or Writers Group, led by Molly Giles, I'm sorry, I don't know the pronunciation. Please join me in welcoming our special guests, Amy Tan and Susanne Pari.
I'm not used to interviewing somebody or being in conversation with somebody on stage who I know so well. So you'll forgive me if this turns into something a little less,
More spontaneous.
Yes, more spontaneous. How many of you are writers in the audience? Okay. All right, that's good for me to know because I want to talk about things that you'll be interested in hearing. Since this book is a lot more than a memoir, Amy, it is a rumination on how you think. And it's really hard to describe how you think. Have you ever tried to do that? It's an amazing opening up of your mind and your creative process. At the same time, it's also a great book about your parents, your father especially, and it is a real-time journey as Amy goes through memorabilia from her whole life and discovers, like a detective, discovers a lot of things about her family. Her father, her mother, her brothers, and what they thought of you, sometimes hurtful, sometimes revelatory and wonderful. And there's also fiction in here. Fiction, 2 sections that are prologues, or were supposed to be prologues for abandoned novels, which are wonderful. And then quirks, what she calls quirks from her journals. And there's one quirk I want to read before we start talking, because it pertains to what we're doing here tonight, which is talking about books. And also it will give you a sense of how deep Amy's thought process is, but also how funny and weird. So this is a quirk from her journal, weird in a really good way. Intestinal fortitude, it's called. I misread intentions as intestines, and now think the image is an apt one. Your intentions come in part from what was fed to you. So long ago you've forgotten what it was, let alone whether it was good for you or if it simply staved off hunger, whether it was delicious or a kind of poison, an addicting taste. Books are no longer being bought. People are scrimping on their minds. They're starving. It's wonderful. I mean, it's funny and it's quirky.
I write down so many things like that in journals, and I look at them later, and I don't even recognize them. And I realized after a while when I was writing this book that is a part of my mind, these little quirks. And so that was something that I threw in there at the time when I thought I was writing a book about writing and not a memoir. And so if you see these things in there and you wonder, why the hell did she throw all this junk in there? That is the reason why. I managed to keep those. I told my editor this was a book about writing, so I'm leaving them.
So your editor, Dan Halpern, he tricked you, didn't he?
Well, it wasn't exactly tricked. It was a gradual evolution where this was supposed to be an in-between book between novels because I couldn't write something while doing publicity for another book. And he thought we could just put together a book of our emails. We had plenty of material. It was like 15,000 emails. A lot of it was things, though, like, where should we meet? Oh, at this restaurant. What time? So, kind of like SMS. And then there were some that were more about writing and about the kind of questions or that a writer might have of an editor. And then there were these crazy thoughts that I had. I just would tell him all kinds of stuff. And so that was part of the writer's mind, and I decided to include those since I had worked 6 months on gathering these emails.
But then you decided, you gathered them and said,
I looked at them. I
book."
looked at them and I said, this is bad. You know, if I did a whole book of these, it'd be really, really boring. A little paean to kind of laziness and dilatory writing. So we both decided that wasn't going to work. And then I was stuck with writing a real book. And the original title was Mind of a Writer. What do you think? Pretty good? Good? Yay? Nay? Okay. And then it was Dan who said, he sent me an email one day with an attachment, a PDF, and it showed this title page, and it said, Where the Past Begins by Amy Tan.
Figured it out.
I know. No. Don't you think that's bad to have somebody write your title for you?
No, I want that.
No, I mean, that is...
I'm the worst.
And so I said, well, he said, do you like it? And I said, well, he's a poet, my editor.
Yeah, and he loves
Eddie's
food.
publisher.
Oh my God.
And I said, yeah, well, why'd you think of that? And he said, well, you wrote it. And I said, I did? He said, yeah, the last piece you sent me yesterday, that was the last line in the piece. So that's how we got
He
the
found
title.
it. That's what editors do. They're supposed to find things.
They're supposed to tell you actually wrote something.
Yeah,
And-
exactly, because we don't remember.
Well, part of it is that I write in this weird fugue state.
Yeah,
it's
you
like
talk
the
about
thing
that.
you read.
Yeah.
You know, I don't remember until I
Anything,
read
yeah.
it later. And I
Right.
say, this is weird.
Yeah.
You know.
But that's what's so great about it. And there's also, what I love is that you're writing, of course, you write about your father, which was so moving for me. And you write about your mom, which you've been, I mean, everybody thinks you've been writing about your mom forever. And to some extent you have. But you talk about your memories and how the grain of a memory becomes a full-bodied story.
Yeah.
And you go through that process of how that happens to you.
You know, I think a lot of people will say, oh, her subject matter is mothers and daughters, as though I'm writing about, say, addictions or something, you know, some kind of topic. But it's not really topical. A lot of my books just have to do with questions that I have in life, whether it's morality or whether it's identity. And inevitably, it goes back to my mother, because she was a huge part of my life in shaping the way that I think about the world, and also the way I feel about the world. My mother was somebody who had to feel everything so intensely. It made me want to numb myself for a while. Yeah. But coming back as a writer, I ended up wanting to feel the same intensity that she had. And it's those little emotional kernels you're talking about, those grains, that have continued to collect over time, and they become part of the writing, and not in the obvious ways that you think of situations, but really in terms of what I'm trying to find as what we writers call epiphanies, a deeper understanding of ourselves. Or it comes in the way that I see metaphor, imagery, that is part of my mind.
Tell me about so throughout the book, you are actually in real time, or in the time that you're writing this, sifting through boxes and boxes of memorabilia. And at the same time as you're doing this, you're analyzing what's coming up from seeing this memorabilia. So
I actually had 80 boxes, 80 boxes of junk. But I condensed it down to about 7, and those are the ones that are in my office.
But you still had to go through all of those.
I had to go through all of them gradually, looking at them. And it really was, as you said, it was like solving a puzzle, a detective, because I would find a bit of something here, say my father's diary, and then I'd find a report card here, and it was about the same date. Then I would find an interview in a book, and they all related. Then I'd find a petition to avoid deportation by my parents, and those were all linked. And I was discovering this for the first time. Some aspect of our lives that also formed the quality of the life that we had back then, one of secrets and, lies in order to cover up what was going on in our family. And I discovered the lies, now it's 60 years later.
Right, but your reaction to those, then you analyzed or examined your reaction to those discoveries. So one of my questions is, as writers, we know that when we write something or when something happens to us in real life and we want to write about it, we usually write about it and then we need some distance, meaning time, before we can analyze, or go back and see what we thought of it and how we really felt about it, because it's so filled with emotion.
Yeah.
But you were writing about the past, but you were experiencing emotions about revelations that you were having about the past. And that must have made you really anxious. Am I making noises?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll just keep talking while we're adjusting.
It's on purpose, you realize.
No, it was banging on her cheek. Sorry.
Yeah, I know, I heard that.
One thing I did not have was the luxury to reflect and do that kind of thing that you're talking about. I need to get this book out, and I made a proposal to my editor, Dan, that I should just start writing and have shorter deadlines. I wanted them once a week. And it was sort of like our old writers group days with Molly, who's
Molly
here.
Giles
Molly
is
Giles, our
here.
workshop leader, helped me, put together the Joy Luck Club. Once a week we had to write something, so I knew that I had done it in the past. And so I told Dan I was going to do one piece a week. I did not allow them to call it a chapter. I didn't know what it was going to be. It was going to be material. So it was going to be 15 to 30 pages of material every week. And if you're a writer, you know how insane that is.
Yeah.
30 new pages a week. That gives you no time for reflection, revision, or any of that. But the great thing about that is that spontaneity enables you to write something without self-consciousness. You're forced away from self-consciousness out of sheer terror that you have to do this.
Yeah.
And with that, I went into these fugue-like states where I was just writing whatever came to mind. And a lot of it was emotionally based, just almost confessional in a way. And so each week, one of these pieces. And by the end of the period, I had 5 more pieces I thought I could write. I mean, they were just coming to me now.
That's so great.
Pouring out, and then Dan, my editor, said, "No, we have enough now." I mean, he just decided.
But you have to.
Well, actually, halfway through writing these pieces that are going to be the material for this book about writing, a writer's mind, he tells me, "Oh, it's really memoir." And I said, "What do you mean? It's not memoir. This is a book about writing."
See, Amy has always said, "I will never write a memoir."
And, so a lot of this was, you do require somebody else to tell you what you're writing. The title, "Oh, you wrote that line." He said it's memoir. You're talking about things that happened in the past that inform what you think in the present.
But it's not a usual memoir. It's not, this happened to me, 1975.
No, it's not chronological.
It's not like that. Yeah.
You'll find it is really impressionistic about things related to writing. So in the beginning, it's about imagination. This was the result of my asking this question. Well, it was related to a talk I did for the TED conference, which I hated. This thing is up on the internet, on YouTube, and I hate this talk. They had picked the title, Where Does Creativity Hide? And I thought, hide? We can't even define what creativity is, let alone where it's hiding. So, creativity is like one of those things, if you said, what is creativity? It's like saying, what is thinking? It's impossible. The minute you start to answer it, you're, making a mistake. So I tried to untangle what I meant by creativity in my own mind. What components, I hate that word.
Yeah,
what
it
elements
sounds
of
like Best
me or
Buy
my
or something.
personality or my mind or my morals or whatever, all this stuff that came into, be me, how does that all figure into the way that I write or that I come up with what I imagine?
Right, and there's such a dearth of imagination these days.
Well, a lot of it has to do with death.
Right.
And I think about death every day, don't you?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do.
I don't know. If you're a writer, don't you think about death every day? It's kind of like next to deadlines. There's
Well, you've had a lot
death.
of experience with death.
Yeah,
You've
I
had
do.
a lot of awful experience with death. And you're also not afraid of death. Most
I'm what?
people are not afraid.
I'm not afraid of death. I expect one day I'll die. And I have thought about this probably as a result of my father and brother dying in the same year of brain tumors, and my mother always threatening to kill herself. So it kind of pushes in the forefront right from the very beginning when you're a little kid. And so there's things about death, but more importantly to me, this reminder about death has more to do with meaning. It has to do with my thinking about what I'm thinking about and what I believe and what is deeply felt, what's contradictory, what is in flux. How is it, for example, I have this, I don't know if this is a weird thought, but I have this notion of everything about who I am has been like this accretion, this concatenation of all these experiences, this autobiographical stream that has led to where I am today. And these things have always carried with them little bits and pieces, little memorabilia from the past, which enter into imagery and metaphor. And, as I thought about this, what's in my writing, this is what I realized is there. That who I am, who I was at age 6 is still part of me.
Right.
And it's right there. And what I found in writing this book in this very spontaneous way is that this 6-year-old would come out, that part of me. And I hate to say it that way because it sounds like 3 Faces of Eve or something like that. It's not, I know I'm still present in my present mind. I know who I am. But the 6-year-old consciousness, a narrative that is in the first person, if you want, so to speak, is right there re-experiencing what had gone on. But with the adult perspective of being able to see it. But more, it was a very strange experience of being there and then saying, no, you're safe. And then being there.
It had to have been cathartic in many ways. And I don't mean that in the sense that, it was woo-woo, but just this idea that you could access those emotions of when you were 6. Because we have memories, and you talk about this, we have memories, but our memories are never accurate, really.
Yeah.
And it's our emotions that we can raise with those memories if we sit long enough with them and are quiet enough, which we don't tend to be these days. That helps us to understand what we really went through.
I discovered a number of things about emotional memory over time, mostly due to disease. My mother's, for example, she had Alzheimer's. And I found that even though she had lost her short-term memory and many of her other cognitive abilities, she still retained emotional memory, which was, and even in present time, I could tell her, we're going to a restaurant, you'll be the most beautiful girl there, everybody will be jealous, order your favorite food.
Such a beautiful section of the book.
So she could retain that new information. I discovered also that during the writing of this, I started thinking about things like, where do our emotional memories reside? And I had a clue about that because I ended up, as a result of Lyme disease, having epilepsy. And I had to take this particular drug, anti-seizure medication.
This is so funny.
And
I remember.
And when, oh yeah, well, she figures into this. So when I started taking this, about 4 or 5 days later, I woke up happy. And, it was like, top of the morning to you, I'm happy, And it was really unnatural because usually it's, I'm grumpy and I want coffee. So I started recognizing that I was a little too happy. And people's responses, well, what's wrong with being too happy? Well, the problem is that you are inappropriately happy at times. Like one time Susanne was telling me a story from her childhood. She had a dentist who, an old, the family had been going to him for years and years, and then he lost his arm, and they continued to go to him, which was, it was about loyalty. And she was telling this very touching story, and then she said, but it was awkward when he leaned in to do my cavities. And the image of that caused me to burst into laughter.
She just couldn't stop laughing.
Everybody stared at me, there I was laughing at somebody's misfortune and a family's loyalty. And I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And then
You would have giggling fits.
I had a giggling fit.
What was the medication anyway? But if you can read about it in the book. It's so interesting.
I would be moved by, genuine things, my dogs wagging their tails or somebody having an emotional moment. Or it could be a Viagra commercial where, people are so happy they can, sex follows dancing. And I would feel very moved by that. So there was something very strange and kind of wrong with these emotional responses. But what I felt at the same time was this vagal nerve response. And I thought, this is really interesting. It feels like my heart's squeezing or something. But all of these emotions, whether it was laughing or being moved by dog food commercials, it was with this little squeezing thing. And I read it, I found out what it was. And that it was this vagal nerve that it actually is on both sides. You have vagus, and it goes up to your temporal lobe and into your
Amy knows
amygdala.
a lot about the brain, guys.
Yeah, I love this stuff because, I have brain disease. So I discovered that the amygdala is where a lot of your traumatic memories are located. And that if I could access this store, this repository of nightmares from my life, I'd have enough for like 100 novels. So I tried these experiments, so that's in the book where I just try to take an experience and, extrapolate from that, just letting it go. Just say, we're going to see where this goes. Take what the feeling is and follow the feeling. Mm-hmm. And so there are a number of things in this book where that's what it is. It's spontaneous writing based on this experiment. And in one case, it led to a memory that was it was so vivid emotionally. It may not have happened exactly that way, but it was the essence, the very essence of what happened every time my mother said, I'm going to kill myself. And then she tried. And my whole, what I was feeling was my weakness in my hands. And I went back to that point where I was trying to make a fist, because this is the way I could control myself, and she wouldn't win. If I could make a fist, I could hold it in. I wouldn't lose it. I wouldn't be scared, but I could not make a fist. And so it just went from there. I'm following these feelings and, becoming boneless and noticing everything. And the end of this, I was shaking so much that the very end of what I was writing, it said, I don't want to know anything anymore. I just want to stop shaking. And that's what I was doing
so
for the
beautiful.
next hour. I was shaking.
Yeah, yeah.
So you said cathartic? No. It was not cathartic. It was disturbing.
Okay.
And, this is why I didn't want this book to come out. It was too soon. I was in this thing about
You were still
being
discovering.
disturbed,
Yeah.
being upset about things. And I wasn't ready to share it with the world. I'm 6. I'm still figuring out. I'm kicking my heels. I'm not ready to go out on stage, with this. But there,
I know you were very, very anxious about this book coming out, and you had no reason.
Well, anxious because I didn't have time to do all the endless rewrites that would have probably turned it into mush.
Right, it would have. It wouldn't have been. I don't think it would have been as good in this respect. I want you to talk a little bit about your father before we talk a little bit about your mother and this notion of having no regrets. But first about your father, because you discovered a lot with this memorabilia that you had, and you sort of reconstructed his life for us. And also you were 16 when he died, so you really do delve into what he might have been like today, which I can imagine would be really hard to do. Because on the one hand, you miss him because he's not here and he's missed so much. And on the other hand, you know him only as that person back then. And and this was all going on during the election, which all of us were really freaking out about.
It was supposed to be the last piece that I was going to write about. Dan had said, "Oh, you have enough." And I said, well, I want to do one still on my father. But the election happened, and I never missed a deadline, in contrast to how I usually always miss a deadline. So I wanted to be on time with this, but the election happened, and somebody other than my candidate won. And I was in despair because I felt, and I could already see on social media, that the country is going in a new direction when I was instructed to return to China. And I was, I couldn't do anything. I was crying and working out and just... So finally, I had this terrible thought, which is, how would my father have voted? Now, the reason why it was terrifying is that my father was a Baptist minister. He was an evangelical minister. Evangelical meaning you would try to convert people and have them be inducted into the religion and into heaven. So naturally, being an evangelical Baptist minister, I imagined he would have had a very strong view on women's rights, meaning reproductive rights. And this very issue was the reason I was so afraid that he would have voted for the other candidate. 45, we call him. So I started to write about, how would I know? What do I know about my father? And I realized I had mythologized him. He was somebody I adored, and what I remembered is he was a great man. He was not a hypocrite. He was a kind man. Everybody loved him. He was charismatic. And so I tried to recall what I knew and what would help me to determine the answer. How would he have voted? The strange thing is that all the memories in the beginning seemed to have to do with going down a slide or going down the stairs, going on a swing or something, and falling and injuring myself. And my father either, picking me up or encouraging me to do the thing that causes me to be injured. And I said, it's so strange that it all came together into this single metaphor, really. I mean, if you're a writer, it coalesced into that, of falling. And him being my protector, but also the cause in a way, because he wanted me to be braver than I was. So there he was, the protector, and also somebody who was trying for me to be better in science projects, like creating a very simple device to use solar cells to operate a doorbell in the fifth grade. Of course, I thought of that, But I think like a lot of other fathers, the other students, they had fathers in what would become Silicon Valley, that probably the only honest science project was the tomato plants growing in the milk carton. But, looking back and seeing how my father, in a way, undermined my confidence by doing things like that. But I loved those times with him. Continuing on with, learning other things about him. In another part, just learning he was kind of vain in a way. Noticing in all the pictures where that he took the photos and then he positioned himself in the photo in a certain kind of smile. Noticing that he told a lie about his education. Noticing the kind of responses that he made to people in trouble. Reading what he said in his diaries. And I had a very uncomfortable discovery about my father that was not idealistic. He was a real person now with flaws. The kind of, when you write fiction, you have to have characters with flaws. Right. And I was discovering that he had become somebody I actually could have used as a character, whereas before I could not, because he was perfect.
I realized that too. I realized it too.
He was perfect. One of the terrible things I discovered is that I was not his favorite. I thought I was, and I found evidence that my older brother was the favorite. And that was a shock. Well, I won't tell you.
I don't know.
You'll have to read the story to know how my father would have voted.
Yeah.
What conclusion I came to about that.
Yeah.
And along with it, what I would have loved for him to have seen in my life, that, that I chose a good man for my husband, and that I made my mother happy, and that I got a doctorate from Dominican University.
Well, so that brings me to this issue of your parents' marriage and your marriage. I've known you forever, and I see that your marriage I know that your marriage is very different from your parents' marriage, as far as the back and forth goes. So there were a lot of arguments with your parents. There was tremendous amount of, they adored each other because they sacrificed so much for each other. There was a lot of shame that your mother had to deal with.
They had a love affair.
They had a love affair, right?
When she was married with 3 children.
Right.
Yeah.
But and you have to read it to find out about that. And why she was completely justified in doing it. But they argued a lot, and she had so many problems because of her upbringing and because of her mother killing herself when she was 9 years, when your mother was 9 years old. And your father seemed always trying to save her, and she always seemed about to die. And there was a tremendous amount of guilt, actually, on his part, because he felt that, he had an affair, and that was against his religion. Whereas your mother didn't feel guilt, but she felt sorry for your father.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
you said to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
But they were very different. And then later, you married Lou, and you have a completely different relationship, whereas most of us end up having similar relationships with our spouses.
You know, in a way, I can see the similarities, but, you know, the components got merged together in a different way. My father, as I said, he was a very kind man, a very good man. He had very high morals. Minister part, I don't know, you know, I wouldn't want to marry a minister, but Lou has those qualities. Lou is kind, he's honest, he has good morals. We share similar values about how we see the world and what our role is in the world. I have some parts of my mother that I deliberately left out of my relationship. I didn't want to have somebody who was over-consuming, needed to be constantly in my mind and in every which way. My mother wanted, at one time, I don't quite understand this diagnosis, but I think somebody said, a friend of ours who was in the writers group, Asa, said my mother was borderline. And I think what that means is that she had this need for you to feel exactly the way she felt, and that her world was exactly the world you should be in at the same time as her. And for me to survive at times, I had to take that role. I had to be and either pretend or experience what she was going through, anger and being condescended to, or frustration or humiliation, all of those things. So I knew in a marriage I did not want to have somebody who just overpowered me emotionally, where I could not have my own emotions, I couldn't think. And I really value that independence of mind that I have in my marriage. We've been together 47 years, so the formula works, kindness, independence.
She's cloned him a few times, but...
Now, my mother's sense of loyalty.
Yeah, that's really,
which is
that's
odd.
something we're in common.
Yeah, it was odd because, not odd in a way. My mother had different ways that she would look at morals and circumstances and situations. So you talk about loyalty, but she had an affair. She was married, had 3 kids, or had 4 kids, one of whom died. But it was completely consistent with the idea that if you had somebody who was despicable, there was nothing to be loyal to, someone loyal to. And just a shortcut for how despicable this man was, besides having girlfriends from the day of the marriage that he would bring home, he raped young girls. Okay, that in a nutshell tells you how bad he was. And she had to leave. She tried to leave and was thrown into jail. During that time,
infidelity.
Met my father, fell in love, and for the first time felt she had someone who loved her, someone she belonged to, after she had been made an orphan when her mother killed herself in front of her. So I had a very damaged mother who had very strong beliefs, who was full of, I used to say my father was the most honest person that I know, but I think we think of honesty as writers in many different ways. And my mother, in the sense that is the most important to me as a writer, was the most honest person I know. She taught me how to see falsity in many things, and to look deeper into my own intentions and to somebody else's. Really to observe human nature. So I would say that, well, this has gone far off topic from marriage.
No.
But I'm just saying, do you...
Yeah, but I think she also taught you a certain independence of mind just by example.
She would always say, don't let anyone tell you who you are. And that was because so many people in China in those old days would tell her and her mother who they were in society. So it was like, no, you don't have to take this. Somebody's opinion of you is not your
I mean,
opinion.
that is so valuable for a mother or a father to say to a girl, because it's something that you may not realize it, but in general, it's just not something we were told as we were growing up. It was more like, behave.
My mother, I never used labels like that she was a feminist or whatever it was, but she was ahead of her time. She said, don't let people tell you who you are. You should have a job so that if you are married, you can run away whenever you want. You should let your husband know if he mistreats you, you will leave immediately. That you can never depend on your looks. You have to depend on your mind and your smarts.
This is all pretty revolutionary.
Because your looks will be over by the time you're 30. And in any case, she said I wasn't beautiful, so I couldn't count on that.
That sucks that she said that.
Well, when she said I was a teenager, I was really upset. I thought, well, am I pretty maybe to Chinese people? And she looked at me and she said, no, not really. Maybe average. And I started crying. She said, why you want to be pretty? Look what happened to me. I was so beautiful. It ruined me.
Yeah.
Great, small consolation when you're 13. But she was right, that you shouldn't depend on any of that to make you happy. It did, in fact, make this horrible man want to marry her. The other thing she said to me is that you're not as good as a boy or a man. She said, you're better, but you have to work a lot harder to have them believe that. She also said to me one day when I was older, and I thought, and I was pregnant, and I didn't know what to do. We were living on the edge with school bills and, jobs and things like that. Very low-paying jobs. And she said, we were sitting in the car, she said, if you, and she didn't say, she didn't use words like, okay, I tell you, you listen to me. That's what she would have said.
Do it.
She said, if you want to have a baby, it doesn't matter if you are poor, you can have the baby, and it's fine. And then she said, but if you do not want to have a baby, no one, not your husband, not your mother-in-law, not your friends, can tell you you must have this baby. And then she told me those times when she didn't want the baby and she was used as a sex machine by this perverted husband, and that she had had an abortion 3 times. And she said to me, I know what it's like to not want to have a baby. And, it was what she was saying to me. Not only did I have the right to choose about the pregnancy, but about everything in life. No one tells you what you must do. Yeah. I ended up having a miscarriage, so I didn't have to make that ultimate choice, but I know the agony of being faced with that. And anybody who's, I think people from the other candidates' party, a lot of them think that you just, let's see, I have lunch at 12, and then I'll go have an abortion at 1, and then we'll have, drinks at 5. Right. I mean, I just don't understand why people don't realize that the right to choose comes with a lot of thought. Mm-hmm. And that's what my mother was saying to me. She knew that all of these come with thought, but no one else can decide for you.
I mean, I think she was an extremely passionate, she was an extremely passionate woman, and because of her passion and because of all that she had been through, there were things that she did that people glom onto as the sort of the Amy Tan mother who tried to kill herself, who tried to kill Amy, who tried to this and that. And I know that some people wonder well, if she was so bad, you know, do you forgive her? And I know some people have asked you that, and I want you to speak to that. Because it seemed like a silly question to me, and it seemed like a silly question to you because of what you write about in the book
Yeah.
later.
Well, I think that it's a valid question given the things that we've talked about and people not knowing the context. If I'm just talking to you and say, yeah, my mother did this, she threatened suicide often. She tried in front of us a few times. She tried to kill me once. But in all of that, it never occurred to me that I had to forgive her. And what I realized is that it had to do with my notion of forgiveness. And that is that and I'm a very unforgiving person. I'm not that wise mother-daughter notion you have of me. Can be very petty and unforgiving and stubborn, and I don't tolerate certain things well. I'm like my mother, very fixated on things. But forgiveness has a lot to do with whether or not you want to continue a relationship with someone. And as I said, I have this notion that all these things that made you who you are, they're all there in this stream.
And
so
you have
just
no
gotta
regrets.
know, you
Right.
just have to know whether you're going to continue the stream or dam it up right there and say, sorry. I always was going to continue that with my mother. And there were many aspects of my mother that I often don't get to talk about how wonderful she really was, what a sense of humor she had. But it was this truth detection that really was probably one of the greatest gifts she gave to me, that she didn't abide by anybody or anything that was false.
We have to go to some questions from the audience. Sadly, we didn't have too many, so I'll read one that came to me. Do you ever, while experiencing a moment in life, become overwhelmed by the need to write something down in the midst to capture the inspiration?
Well, it's like that quirk you read.
Yeah.
Like I thought I heard intestines instead of intentions. It's so funny, I end up writing it down. I do that a lot, and when I don't write it down, then I regret it because I don't remember later what it was. My journals are full of these thoughts, and they often come to me when I'm bored, when I'm at a conference or on an airplane, and it's like these thoughts are just floating by, and I grab them and I put them down. But the humor about it for me is reading them later and having no idea why I had that thought, which makes me think, of course, that I'm possessed. In moments of boredom, I am possessed by another consciousness, and they find something interesting to observe. I can write streams and streams of thoughts and nonstop, and it only occurs when I write in the journal, unedited. That was the essence of how I wanted to capture writing the emails and writing in my journal, the spontaneity, the lack of self-consciousness, and to write this book in a similar process.
Well, you do write a lot about self-consciousness and the idea of having grown up in an immigrant family, and I know exactly how you feel. The hypercritical aspect of, or nature of the immigrant family makes you so afraid.
I'm my worst critic.
Yeah.
I mean, as Molly knows, I will just, revise myself into a hole, and everything that was fresh will go into that hole and be stamped out there like grapes in a very bad batch of wine. I'm that. Not only that, I think because of these pressures put on me, and there's a lot having to do with that in the book. I hate failure. So I have low expectations. Like, I figured the only people who would be here were my friends. And maybe you are all my
Yeah,
friends.
she was like, well, there's...
I can't tell.
I mean, it's
but it
amazing.
would be like 3 rows of friends, you know. But these are low expectations, so that when I see there are 5 rows, then I'm, you know, I have won. I have succeeded enormously, you know. I have low expectations of all of my work. And then when somebody tells me it's good, I don't want to hear it. I don't want
Right.
to, I can't believe it. My editor, publisher, Dan, was not allowed to tell me anything about his reactions as I was writing this book. Every week I was turning in 15 to 30 pages, and he could
Oh, you
not.
didn't need to hear him say, this is
No,
good?
I said, you can only say something if you think I'm seriously going in a really bad direction.
But
And,
you weren't self-conscious with him then?
I was, but I had rules. I just had, I'm turning it in, you can't say a thing unless it's seriously going off track.
Okay.
And then you can keep it in mind, and at the very end we can talk about it and see what we do with the material. Every now and then he would slip up and he'd say something like, oh, this is really good. I'd say, Dan, and they, oh, I'm sorry, you know.
Oh,
I have
that's
a lot of
interesting.
emails where he'll say, I'm sorry.
Because I can't hear that enough.
Oh, God. No, I don't know. I was damaged in the low expectations element in my personality.
No,
I can't hear it. I cannot hear it.
I do. I create.
I hate it. I hate hearing
Really?
praise. Said I don't want to hear it. I don't
but
want to
I've
hear
been praising
any.
you about this now
No,
for like 2 weeks.
it makes me, when I hear praise, I just like,
Well,
I really, and I'll smile.
You think it's
very much.
untrue.
But I don't know why. It just makes me
interesting.
very uncomfortable. So,
Okay.
but when I say things about anything that makes me uncomfortable, or that I'm a little distressed, or I'm really a very happy person. No, really. Very calm,
is,
very
actually.
happy. I
You
know
are.
my things to worry about. I know the things I should not worry about, what's
It's
more
true.
important. But the thing is, I like the way that I am. I like being disturbed by expectations. I like thinking about death.
You didn't always, though. Or did you always?
Well, I never thought of it as I like these things.
Yeah.
But writing this book reinforced that I like this stuff about me, and I wouldn't want to get rid of it, because all of it is me. All
That's
of this
so
stuff
important.
that came from the past, from my mother, from my father, good and bad experiences, they became me, and I don't want to take away any of it. This is the kind of nice thing about being a writer, is that you can take, psychological aberrations as a benefit, and
We should
that's what I've done.
We should all reach this point.
Yeah. No, I'm sort of, if any of you are counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, I'm kind of the person you don't want to do your ads, because my whole thing is like, stay disturbed, stay conflicted, be contradictory, don't believe yourself, or I don't know.
Yeah, so
all of those things.
That is the self-help from Amy Tan
That's
for
it.
this evening.
Those are the tips.
And I
That's all
want
you
to
need.
tell you all that this very mediocre memoir is a must-read.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. This was fun. I hope it was fun for all of you. Thank you all for
Thank
coming.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne.